one thing that comes up over and over again is the lack of actual evidence for the existence of gods. Theists simply have none. They have claims that cannot be substantiated, beliefs that cannot be validated, and arguments that cannot be verified. But the one thing they don't have is any actual evidence that can actually be objectively evaluated. But when you ask theists if they have evidence, invariably they'll say yes, and then go on to present something that isn't evidence at all. I don't think most of them have any clue what actual evidence really is. So I came across this video about J. Warner Wallace arguing that Christians should be able to make a case for God, and then completely screwing the whole thing up. Let's watch.
So for me, my journey was, number one, do I have a good reason to believe that these are reliable eyewitness accounts? And up to the miracles, I would have said yes. But when it got to the miracles, I would have said no. So in other words, this is some form of historical fiction, I would have said.
Right.
So the next thing I had to do was ask myself, well, why do I accept some of this, but I reject the miracle accounts? Because I'm a philosophical naturalist. I was an atheist.
Okay.
So my next question was, do I think that my philosophical naturalism can really explain the universe the way it is? And that's when I started to do the work that's in God's crime scene. Because now the question was, do I think that there's good reason to believe that just space, time, matter, the laws of physics and chemistry can get everything else we see in the universe? Really? Can just that explain everything?
He betrays a fundamental error in his thinking right there, one that we have to be very aware of and be sure to point out. He says that he couldn't believe that just time, space, matter, etc. were responsible for the things that we see around us. Well, regardless of his beliefs on the matter, and the overwhelming majority of scientists disagree, that really means nothing when it comes to God. Even if every scientist everywhere agreed that there was no way that the natural world came into existence through naturalistic forces, that doesn't prove God exists in any way, shape, or form. You don't just get to say, I've dismissed all the other things I can think of, therefore God. No, once you dismiss all the other possibilities, your answer is, I don't know, and you keep looking. God is never the default answer, but that's how apologists always frame it.
Because if I'm wrong about that, and there's something that has to be extra natural, something outside just what we call nature, space, time, matter, the laws of physics and chemistry, well then I got to at least open up the door to supernatural activity, including the miracles that are in the Gospels.
No, actually you don't. You don't just open the door to anything that comes down the pike because you can't explain something. You only allow in those things which are actually demonstrably so. But this is really just hypocrisy because he's only really willing to open the door to Christian mythology and not every mythology under the sun. Where are his arguments against the Egyptian mythos in which the god Adam ejaculated into space and created everything? He doesn't seem to have that. It's only the Christian God that they're willing to talk about, and that's hypocrisy.
So that's why, for me, that my journey was kind of backwards from a lot of atheists. I wasn't interested, does God exist and is Christianity true? I stumbled into the Gospels and realized these look like reliable accounts to me.
Yeah.
But they contain miracles.
Then you have no clue what reliable accounts actually look like. The fact is, the Gospels are about as unreliable as you can get. Yeah, I know that Simon Greenleaf, the famous 17th century lawyer, argued that the Gospels would stand up to any scrutiny in a court of law, but the fact is, they wouldn't. Any story that includes magic and as many clear and present discrepancies between the stories as the Gospels have would be thrown out as completely unreliable. Anyone who gets up on the witness stand and started spouting claims about miracles would be dragged out in a straitjacket. So no, the Gospels make no sense to anyone skeptical, which makes me doubt that he was any kind of credible atheist to begin with. But his idea that he stumbled across the Gospels being a valid claim, that's also a bit ridiculous. The Gospels represent the dominant cultural delusion where he was born. Had he lived in the Middle East, he would have stumbled across the Quran and have been making claims about that. Had he lived in India, he would have stumbled across the Vedas and be pushing Hindu mythology right now. The idea that he just so happened to be living in the one area where the one idea that he thinks is credible was commonplace, that's kind of ridiculous.
So I had to do the extensive work, which I talk about in God's crime scene, to know that it turns out that my naturalism does not explain the universe very well. and that there's a better explanation for the universe, and that's that God is the designer of that universe.
Yeah.
Yes, magic is a much better explanation. Gotcha. But unfortunately for you, very few actual scientists agree with you. In fact, studying nature and the world around us has made the vast majority of scientists atheists. They find no evidence for any gods whatsoever. In fact, in the National Academy of Sciences, the premier scientific organization in America, 93% of the members are atheists. When you look at all scientists, you find that the overwhelming majority of scientists in the hard sciences are atheists. These are people who are atheists because there's just no good reason to be otherwise.
I know, I've read a lot of books, and a lot of them I can't remember because they get deeper and deeper, but as you kind of follow, whether it's a book against Christianity or whether it's a book for Christianity, I spent a lot of time just reading, and then I'd have a dictionary beside me, and I would check things out in this area, and when I got done, I'd always have this concept that this is a really lousy book at disproving God. And then I'd pick up a book for God. And I got to tell you, of all the stuff that I've gone through over the years, that the brilliant stuff is the stuff for God. And if Christians would just start to read a little bit, rather than watch your favorite screaming evangelist only.
No, not so much. What he's really saying is that the stuff against God is way the hell over his head, and he just doesn't get it. But the stuff for God is written for the lowest common denominator, and he gets it because he's already predisposed to believe it. I've read a lot of apologetics books, and they are, almost without exception, really asinine. They assume that anyone reading them either already believes or is desperately looking to believe and isn't going to ask too many questions. They're not written for skeptics who are looking for actual evidence, because no such evidence really exists. But when you go to science books, those are written for people who are educated, who already have a decent amount of knowledge and background in rationalism and critical thinking. They're not written for idiots, and if you have to read through them with a dictionary like this guy did, you're an idiot.
Well, and think about this too. You know that documentaries never quite do as well as narratives, as dramatic narratives. And this is why I think that this God is not.
What do you mean by dramatic narrative?
Well,
like a movie?
A movie, yeah. Okay. So, for example, you're far less likely. We're going to do a series of evidential documentaries related to God's not dead. But I suspect that in the end, those won't be nearly as well received or as well watched as the movies themselves.
Right.
Well, it's because we're more interested in the story.
Yep.
And it's what we try to do in these movies now is to look, there may only be 10 minutes in a 2-hour movie that really is about making the case for why this is true. Well, but what's brilliant about it is it's couched in the drama that engages you and you buy in it. Now you're interested enough to actually listen.
If a teacher's getting nailed for saying something as simple as Jesus, you're on her side, and now you want to see what's going to happen to her in that court. Who's going to stand up for her?
That's
She better win this. That's true, the story.
So it kind of pulls you in.
And Wallace gets it where I don't think the host, Leon Fontaine, does. The people who are looking for religion are looking for a story. They're looking for a narrative. They want something that they can become emotionally attached to. They don't care about the facts. They don't want to learn anything. They want to be comforted and entertained. But when it comes to science, when it comes to people who actually care about the world around them and what it's actually like, they're not there for entertainment. They want to get down to the nitty-gritty details. They want to see the numbers. They want to see the calculations. They want to get their hands dirty and hear not the stories about the world, but the world itself. But religious movies aren't about educating. They're about indoctrinating. They're about getting people emotionally invested in the narrative and then using that opportunity to stuff dogma into their brains. That's why they spend so much time and effort and money catering to entertainment instead of documentary, because they know which group of people are more open to their message.
Now, my hope is that this is the catalyst that takes the average Christian who watches a movie like this and wakes up that, to realize I probably should be able to master some of these things.
But the majority of Christians don't want to master these things. They don't really care about the mechanics of their faith or even the content of their faith. They just want to feel good about the things that they believe. It's all emotion, no intellect. And while sure, you might get a few people who become interested in apologetics, just like you got a few people who watched Star Trek in the 60s and became scientists because of it, the majority are just going to sit there slack-jawed because to them, it's just entertainment just like their faith is.
I probably should, if somebody asked me, would I be able to do this? This is really the next step for us, right? Is to know, are we able to articulate what's available evidentially, but we just don't pay attention to it.
No.
That's because nothing is available evidentially. Most Christians who even care about that kind of thing aren't really interested in whether or not their faith can be justified. They just want to feel like apologists have something to say, whether it's credible or not, because they probably don't understand the philosophical gymnastics that apologists go through in the first place. Something complicated comes out of their mouth. They must know what they're talking about, so they just go away with a warm feeling that they've got to be on the right track. But if they bothered to dig into the words of the apologist, if they bothered to really understand what they were saying and whether or not it's credible, there would be a lot less Christians because the apologists really have nothing worthwhile to say.
Now, granted, we spend a lot of time, though. We probably know what the stats are on our fantasy teams. We know, listen, we're spending 10 hours a week doing something. Are we spending the 10 hours preparing ourselves to be good case makers?
Well, what's interesting is when you're raised in a Christian, I was raised in a phenomenal Christian home. My parents are both pastors, loved God, and they actually took me on all these journeys. I read apologetics books, as a young guy, 12, 13, etc. So I'm totally convinced. But still, there came a time in my life where I felt myself disengaging from the fact my parents are right, my parents are right, my parents are right. And I began to get older as a kid. They're not infallible. And then for myself, I again re-examined the evidence. And so for all these Christian families that are watching today, you need to get something like this into your home so you can talk that way. Like I got 5 kids, and I was just, as you were talking at the beginning of the show, I was just, because I'm at a place right now where they're all working with us. None of them are perfect. They're kids. But no, they're not kids, they're adults. But they love God. And I was thinking, did I do that? And I thought, actually, my parents taught me to do that. We talked our way through other world religions, the effect it has on countries there. How do they treat women? How do they treat kids? How do we deal with drugs, alcohol, sex? Why would the Bible say this? We would just keep talking about it. And we'd talk about their friends and what it did to their life. And so there almost was what you were saying. I kind of probably by accident stumbled onto this, that we just talked our way through everything by looking at what's out there.
Geez, stumble around much? That was about the least concise way to get from point A to point B I've seen in a long, long time. But what he's really talking about is indoctrination. He raised his children, and indeed he was raised himself, from the perspective that Christianity is right and everything else is wrong, so the idea that he looked at other world religions and how they treat people really isn't that impressive if you start from the perspective that they're wrong to begin with. Let's be honest, if you actually read the Bible, it doesn't teach treating women very well either. Christianity doesn't have a very good history in that regard. The only reason Christianity in the West, by and large, doesn't act on the things in the Bible is because our secular society has neutered their beliefs. It said, you're not allowed to do that, and then they rationalized their way around it and found a way to justify not doing what the Bible clearly commands. Christianity isn't any better than those other religions. It's just had a muzzle forcibly put on that keeps it largely in check. But if you want to know what Christianity is really like without the muzzle, just look at places like Africa, where Christians murder gays, they kill people from other religions. They're everything that ISIS is, and American evangelicals go over there regularly to encourage them because they just can't get away with that kind of behavior here.
Yeah, running it through the lens of your Christian worldview. And when it comes down to, in the end, when you were asked, because all of us as parents try to do this, why is this true, Mom? Why is this true, Dad?
Yeah.
Why do you think this is true? I think what our kids in this generation want to know
more than feelings.
Is it's got to be more than just because if the thing we typically reject as a young person is wanting to be just exactly like Dad.
Yeah.
Well, give me something that's outside of you that demonstrates this is true.
But you can't do that. There's no fundamental difference between Mom and Dad say so and some guy in a pulpit says so. It's still just authority figures issuing proclamations, usually under some sort of threat. Do as I say or else. But where religion is losing the young today, they're just not willing to do what someone tells them to do because they tell them to do it. Kids learn science in school. They learn, to a minimal degree at least, critical thinking. They learn, again to a minimal degree, to think for themselves. They don't want to hear what they should believe. They want to see the data. They want to see the facts and figures so they can determine if it's worth believing for themselves. But the religious don't have any of that. They have no facts and figures. They have no data. They have no evidence. They just have stories, and stories don't impress anyone looking for the truth. That's why the young overwhelmingly do not identify with religion. That's why the religiously unaffiliated have risen from 16.7% in 2007 to 22.8% in 2014. People are catching on to the fact that religion tells a good story, but they've got nothing to actually back up that story in reality. Christianity dropped by 3.4% in just 7 years, and irreligiosity rose by 6.7%. That's gotta hurt the religiously delusional. It has to tell them that what they're doing just isn't working. But they have no plan B because what they're spewing is nonsense. They're con men trying to sell snake oil to an audience that knows better. And the audience just keeps getting smarter. Too bad we can't say the same thing for the religious.